I think the reason why the invasion happened was that Putin was decided for this anyway since the very beginning. The warnings started coming already from autumn months from the United States thanks to the intelligence that was provided. We see now, retrospectively at least, but the problem was that I think until the very last moment it was unclear in which shape and form the invasion will take place. And this was only my assessment during the last week before the invasion that I finally accepted the variant that there could be an all-out war. This is something that actually I have postponed in my thinking and until the very last moment, until the infamous speech that Putin made after the session of the Security Council. And at that point I already admitted that there could be such a scenario. But at the same time I listed two others, and still I predicted that sort of the interplay between the jure and de facto status of the Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast and their control by the so-called separatist forces could be the more interesting variants. And we know now, at least, that it was really the last days, probably within the last week, that Putin and this closest leadership decided on how far and which shape the operation would finally take place. So this was not a given fact, but probably he was decided to go in since the very beginning. But the shape and form, and this is something that was largely interesting for me, was unclear. There are big question marks over, for example, the frozen Russian assets, be that belonging to the Russian central bank, but also to Russian oligarchs and other state assets that the Western companies and Western governments actually have already frozen. And I think we need to be looking for creative ways how to make use of these resources for the post-war reconstruction of Ukraine, because this will require an enormous amount of money. There are estimates of the World Bank starting from the 350 billion, but more probably realistic is up to 500 or 700 billion of US dollars that will be necessary for reconstruction of Ukraine, and we need to get the money from somewhere. And seeing the sort of economic and social hardship that is already now visible in most of European Union as a consequence of the war and rising prices of energy, petrol and all that, we need to be looking for how to push Russia to pay for what it has cost to Ukraine. So this is something that we need to be also focusing in the longer run. An immense courage over the last couple of months as a result of the Russian aggression on Ukraine, and I have not seen this amount of foreign and security sort of energy that has been invested in dealing with the conflict since many years ago. So here I would say that this was really the courage in the foreign policy, it was the courage in defense and security, which then emancipated through the Czech EU presidency, which started on the 1st July. And since then, the Eastern European agenda, Ukraine agenda, I would say, has dominated basically EU discussions, actually thanks to also help from the Czech Republic, for help from Prague when setting the agenda of the talks. Ukrainians were present at during all informal summits of European leaders in different variations, starting from energy to environment to justice and home affairs. Ukrainian counterparts were always present at the discussion, and I think this is very important. And we have seen that emancipating number of times, including during the informal summit of foreign ministers at the end of August, which welcomed the trio of associated countries and their foreign ministries for informal breakfast and discussion on what's happening in Europe and how to tackle that. I will start by saying that the EU's role in foreign security but also defense inside of Europe as a continent has increased since the 24th of February. We have seen the European Union using new instruments such as the European Peace Facility for the first time supplying funds and weaponry to Ukraine as the first ever mission. This is a concrete emancipation of new leadership that the European Union is introducing. The same leadership has been shown when the EU recently introduced a new training mission for up to 15,000 Ukrainian soldiers. This is also unprecedented, and it is the European Union and not NATO doing this. So you can see that the role and importance of European Union is increasing in this domain across the wider region of Eurasia and the European neighborhood, including the South Caucasus. And here I would say that the European Political Community meeting was a concrete example of this trend, where when the Czech Prime Minister welcomed the heads of states from 43 countries, including Azerbaijan, including Armenia, but also Turkey. And here I would say that this was very significant, that the leaders of the three countries actually met on the side of Turkey and Armenia for the first time ever in this personal composition. So I would say that this sort of facilitating role and giving way to new opportunities has been something very visible. One of the concrete results of this meeting in Prague was the establishment of the EU civilian mission that is now taking place on the territory of Armenia, and it is there to provide confidence, to establish a concrete presence on the ground, which many people inside of the European Union, inside of many of the South Caucasian countries has called for years, not only to give way to Russian peacekeepers here in South Caucasus and also military bases that they have around the region, but also to have EU presence on the ground. And I think this is very important that EU is finally doing this. Even if this is a civilian mission, it is still the first ever presence on the sort of two countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan. And this is very significant, you know. This is copying a trend that has been established earlier in Georgia, but this is something new, and I think I'm highly appreciative towards the initiative. We will see about the results. The mandate is relatively short for the next 2 months, but I would say that the leadership of Charles Michel, the leader of the European Council, is quite instrumental in pushing this forward and also maintaining the high presence of the European Union in the dialogue between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I think this is not completely impossible, even if it is very difficult under the current circumstances. I would say that the idea itself, it's very tangible and very interesting, and it has a long history going back to the beginnings of the 20th century and much earlier than that. So I think there is a good potential and good reason for this such kind of cooperation. We from Central Eastern Europe know some projects. You know, one of the concrete examples could be the Visegrad Cooperation, which has been founded in the early 1990s by the leadership of the then leaders of Czechoslovakia, Poland and Hungary, when seeing the importance of the good neighborly relations between the three countries, and also the importance of closer cooperation with the West in a wider sense, but also especially the European integration projects. So here, obviously, this is a model that could be interesting. There are also other ones around the European continent, Benelux, the Baltic Cooperation, and other ones, Nordic Cooperation, for example. But obviously this is up to the leaders of the South Caucasian countries to decide about this. You know. To be completely honest, this is very difficult to predict at this point, because as you mentioned, there are so many variables. How the war in Ukraine will end? Will Ukraine win? Will Russia win? Or will there be a painful compromise for both of the partners, which could lead to some destabilization inside of Russia, for example? Will Russia be sort of suffering from internal domestic tensions, possibly resulting in a civil war. These are all big questions that will have an unprecedented outcome for the region of South Caucasus, which has been always affected by the great power competition to such a large extent, neighboring Russia, Iran, but also Turkey from all possible directions. This is also this has been a traditional challenge for the whole region. So indeed, there is a great interest, from my perspective, as I see it, for all three of the countries of South Caucasus to actually be on the side of international law, be on the side of international principles that basically unite and respect, show some respect to each other rather than the opposite. Because all the other ones, all the other tendencies, be that from the Russian side, be that of destabilization, be that fragmentation, violence, conflict, these are all very negatively affecting the region of South Caucasus. So this is maybe just to start very generally. But here obviously the question is once again to the people of Azerbaijan and also to the government on which side they want to stand, because there are big opportunities for closer cooperation with the European Union. The more significant and comprehensive agreement with the European Union is just being concluded, as I understood. This is one of the opportunities that was given to Armenia earlier for a closer integration with the European project and closer cooperation with the European Union. So here obviously there can be a European future for Azerbaijan if the leaders decide.